Well, today let's take you through a typical day here on the ICW. We're in North Carolina. We've got a bit of a long day, so starting right at sunrise here as the sun is coming up. But first, a little bit of pour over coffee, engine room checks, and we'll get underway. Check the oil, belt tension, coolant, and look for drips every single day that we get underway here on Witness. So that's what we're doing next. Phone never really captures the full moon, but this is an amazing full moon setting here on dead calm water. We should have a beautiful morning here on the ICW. Jennifer's pulling up the anchor, and we're getting underway. It's about 6:15 in the morning. We still have a beautiful sunrise going on, and we are ready to hit the ICW. It is a Saturday, and so we do expect traffic out here, but calm waters at least this morning. So we're here underway. It's about 10 a.m. and we're waiting on a bridge to open. So we thought we'd do a little bit of talking about some of the tools and planning and navigation aids that we use while we're on the ICW. This stretch of the Great Loop is different than the navigating we've had to date. So we started in the Great Lakes as far north as we went. Lake Michigan had its own challenges with weather and waves. Big water. We navigated many bridges and locks coming down the inland rivers to get us to the Gulf. The Gulf crossing in itself was its own set of challenges. The Gulf ICW on the west coast of Florida and the Panhandle was similar in some ways to this Atlantic ICW. We certainly had our share of navigational challenges in the Bahamas, and now we're into a new phase, a new chapter, and so with it comes some differences, and so we just wanted to talk about what those are and some of the tools that we use. So this bridge is about to open here for us, so we're gonna stay attentive to what's going on right here, but as we make our way the rest of the day here, we'll just talk about a few of the things that we use to make days like today possible. Cheers.
Cheers.
So the first thing we'll talk about are the navigation tools that we use, how we determine our route, and the screens that are in front of us here. We have three, and they are our Garmin chart plotter that has its own map and routing. We use Navionics on our phone, and we use Aquamaps on an iPad, and each has its advantages and disadvantages, and that's why we need all three to help us navigate these sometimes tricky waters. On our iPad that is running Aquamaps, we have two special features that you absolutely must have on the ICW. Number one is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers data overlay. This gives us a heat map of the depth in these waterways. The ICW is prone to shoaling, which is when weather or current brings sand into the ICW, and it's constantly changing. And so having that Corps of Engineers data overlaid as a heat map to be able to determine our route through some of those tricky areas is super, super important. And then the second thing
is the Bob 423 checks. So you can download Bob's tracks onto the Aquamaps app in your iPad, and he travels the ICW 6 months of the year, and you just follow his tracks, and it's super helpful especially through the shoaling and the skinny water and the narrow water that is susceptible to low tide problems.
Yeah, so a super useful tool. You just get a dotted line right there on your chart, and so you just follow the dotted line. He is sure to get you in the deep water, and we know because he's in a sailboat, he draws more than our 3.5 to 4 feet for witness, and so we know we're safe if we're on his line. And so we aim to do that through especially the tricky parts, but really the entire ICW, we just follow Bob's track. So thank you, Bob 423, for this amazing service, and his volunteers. He's got volunteers that are also out there on the waterway as well.
So every night before we leave or morning of on the ICW, I go to bobicw.blogspot.com, and he has listed mile by mile the waterway guide alerts that have come up in the ICW, and so he has them listed by mile, and then I go to our trip for that day and I look at all the alerts for that day, and they link straight to the actual waterway guide alert, and then I write them on a post-it note for Seth, and I put it right under our Garmin so that he can see like step by step, mile by mile, the alerts for the day. And I also put what needs to be done, whether he needs to favor the port side or the starboard side, and when we need to reach skinny water at not low tide, that kind of a thing.
Two other things that we use to do planning throughout the day here on the ICW. Number one is Nebo. Nebo is kind of like a social network for loopers with some map navigation kind of ability built in. So what we'll do is we'll look ahead throughout the day and see who is where they spent the night, or where we're going, who went through what water the day before that might have advice, and at what tide they might have gone through. So we have some buddy boats that are maybe a day or 2 or 3 ahead of us, and we'll ask them, hey, how did this little skinny part go, and what did you experience? And they'll say, oh no, I saw 13 feet of water under me. They must have dredged since that alert. So that's one thing. We also help people behind us. So if we know of a boat coming through and we see some skinnier water, or we see that we're going through at a pretty reasonable tide, but they're a few hours behind and they'll be on a sinking tide, that hey, you might want to speed up before you get to this spot, especially depending on their draft. And then the other thing that we have not used, but we've certainly heard it on the radio and know that other loopers use, is Towboat US and Sea-Tow. Those captains that are out here know where you're going to get stuck because they tow people off of those spots. And so if you radio them and say, hey, I'm going through this cut right here, is there any local knowledge that you can share with me about how to navigate that? They're more than happy to do that. And so that's an easy
even though you're taking money out of their pockets.
Yeah, they don't want you to go aground anyway. they really don't. So anyway, that's one more tool that we can use that keeps us safe out here on the ICW. Another somewhat unique challenge here on this stretch of ICW, at least, is tide. So we've had 2 or 3 foot tides before on this trip, but this stretch in particular can have significantly more, and a lot more that you need to think about tides. So when we plan our day, we look at high and low tide times. We look at any of the shallow water that we might be getting into and time our arrival at those spots for something that's not low tide or mid tide and rising. We also have to look at slack tide when the current isn't moving as much associated with the tides, because you don't want to arrive at a dock when current is ripping through there. So it's not just about the height of the water, but also the current that the changing of the tide generates. We also have to plan our day a little bit around, although I struggle to wrap my head around exactly how it influences our day. But like right now, we're picking up about a knot because the tide is pushing us. We've seen as high as 2.5 knots, either headwind or tailwind, depending on where we are in the waterway, because of the inlets, and then which direction the tide is going. So that can be hard. You can plan a certain timing for your day, a certain cruise speed, and then go out the window as soon as you get out there and see what the tide is doing to that stretch of water. Wakes can also be a little unexpected here on the ICW. You think it's a nice, smooth, calm day, so you don't really have the boat buttoned down for heavy seas, but then you get some of these center console boats or sport fishers come through, and they're just maybe not used to the courtesy that we might normally extend to fellow boaters. And so here we go, wake, and we just shout it out, and everybody kind of braces for it. There are special navigation marks, ATONs, aids to navigation, on the ICW, and we have this little reminder to keep the red on our left, the green on our right. That would be opposite of some of the normal ATONs that you would see coming into a port. Red right returning is normally the rule, but you see these two, green over here and red over here. They have little yellow marks on the normal markers. So those yellow marks, that is a yellow square. That means we're on the ICW. And so that's to keep on your right. And that, as you head north, and that is a little yellow triangle, and that is on the red on our port side. And that's how we want to keep that heading north. If we switch into an inlet where we're going back into a river or something like that, we flip this around to remind us it's red right returning again, rather than on the ICW.
So I'm also the meteorologist on this trip, but I have been lulled into a sense of security being on these calm, protected waters. On the big water, I'm used to, checking it all the time, multiple times a day, a week in advance, and really being on top of it, and so I just sometimes forget, but you have to really be on it, because sometimes these protected waters turn into large bodies of water, like a bay or a sound, where weather matters and waves matter. So there's just another detail that you have to keep track of on the ICW.
Well, we hope this helped a little bit in sharing kind of our experience out here on the ICW, and provided you a little bit of insight. If you have questions or comments, put them down below. We'd love to hear from you, and tell us what we missed, or the questions that you have. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. Cheers.
Cheers.